Hi everyone, it's Dr. Hall. In lecture 22, we're going to talk about circadian rhythms. We're also going to talk a bit about the importance of sleep and interventions for problems with sleep, but most of that is going to be media assignments rather than lecture. So for this little bit of lecture, we're going to talk about circadian rhythms, and then I'm briefly going to discuss some insomnia treatments because they're relevant to what we'll be talking about previously. So let's talk about circadian rhythm. So the word circadian comes from Latin. So circa means about or approximately, and diem means a day. So what this is, a circadian rhythm is any regular or cyclical behavioral pattern or physiological pattern that seems to occur roughly on a 24-hour cycle. So for humans, it's our sleep-wake cycle, also hunger and eating. There's some other things that we'll see in a minute. And a lot of plants also have some behaviors that they do differently. So some of them close their leaves at night and then open them during the day. Some flowers do that with their petals. And, things change over the course of the day. So that's a circadian rhythm. Here is that example I was telling you about of things that are different in humans, and this is just a sampling. This is not everything. So this is looking at kind of the cycle of a full 24-hour day. So say if you go to sleep here around midnight, that would be very late for me. You hit your body temperature. We talked about how body temperature goes down during sleep. Then you have a rise in blood pressure. You stop secreting melatonin. You're likely to have a bowel movement in the morning. Testosterone and other sex hormone secretion is higher in the morning, and you tend to be quite alert. You might be like, I'm not alert at 10 in the morning. I know. But in general, right, we tend to have our best physical coordination and best reaction time in the afternoon. Cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength is in the late afternoon. And then our blood pressure and body temperature are higher toward the end of the day, and then we kind of start to go down from there. So there are lots of things about our bodies that change over that kind of 24-hour period, that circadian rhythm. When I was working in medicine, there were sometimes when I was ordering a blood test and I would have to specifically order it at a certain time of day because it's something that normally fluctuates over the course of the day, so we'd have to, interpret results accordingly. So you might say, well, yeah, it's because of the light, right? And we're responding to sunlight and then the absence of sunlight. And that is true in part, but it turns out, well, even in the absence of changing light conditions, our bodies will still follow a cyclic schedule of approximately 24 hours. And the first time this was kind of noted was with one of those plants, and scientists noticed that it closed its leaves at night and it opened its leaves in the morning. So then he put it in a dark room and it still opened its leaves at the time it would normally open its leaves, right? So yes, we're responding to light, but there's also this intrinsic rhythm. And in humans, we have studied this in a couple of ways. One, there was this French cave explorer who decided to live underground for 6 months with no exposure to light. And he had all kinds of crazy circadian rhythm. Sometimes it was 36 hours, sometimes it was crazy. So then they actually did a controlled experiment where some people volunteered to live in an underground bunker that was continuously lit, so you didn't get any changing light signals for several days. And what they found is that in humans, if we have a free running circadian rhythm where there's no kind of external cues such as sunrise and sunset to guide us, it seems to be about 26 hours. So, each day gets a little bit later and later and later rather than 24. But most of us are responding to external cues, and so most of us are on a 24-hour cycle most of the time. So this is because our circadian rhythms are entrainable. You can train them. They respond to these external time cues, and they have a great term for this. It's from the German, and it's called Zeitgrubers. So Zeitgrubers are these time cues, and there's certainly environmental things like the sun coming up, the sun going down, the changes in light, and we'll talk later in a minute about how that actually is processed in the brain to then change our circadian rhythm. But then there's social things too. So I lived for a time in New York City, and if you were up in the middle of the night at like 4 a.m., it was quiet. Nobody's around, right? So, and people aren't as active. So even if you're awake and around other people, they're not moving around as much. So you respond to these cues, and then you can also adjust. So for example, if you travel to a different time zone, it might be rough at first when everybody's getting up, when you're feeling like it's time to go to bed, but you can gradually adjust over time to a different cycle that would be in sync with wherever you are. So what we're seeing on the left here is the diagram from the Hedges textbook. So we've got an example up here of somebody who's, going to bed around midnight every night, sleeping for about 8 hours and then up for the other 16 hours of the day. But then you take them and you put them into this free running circadian rhythm where they have no Zeitgrubers, they have no external time cues, and each day will tend to be about 26 hours. But then you just put them back into a normal environment and they'll go right back to the normal 24-hour day that we all tend to follow. So, of course, light is a major Zeitgruber. So that sunrise and sunset and the changing quality of light over the course of the day has a big impact on us. And it does so via the retinohypothalamic tract, which you may or may not remember from when we did our unit on vision. So remember the retinal ganglion cells that are kind of the ultimate cell that eventually the signal reaches on the retina. So it starts with the photoreceptors, and then it goes to the bipolar cell, and then it goes to the retinal ganglion cells. Well, there's a special group of retinal ganglion cells that themselves are photoactive, and their axons, instead of traveling with the optic nerve and then to the optic chiasm and all that, they travel instead through the retinohypothalamic tract, and they go right to the hypothalamus, specifically the suprachiasmatic, there we go, nucleus. And it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus because it is physically located superior to, just above, the optic chiasm. Right? So it's just right on top of it. So they called it the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's just telling you where it is, and it is physically in the hypothalamus. And then the neurons in the SCN, in the hypothalamus, signal the pineal gland, which you might remember the pineal gland we learned about a long time ago, produces melatonin. The way this works is interesting. So when there is light coming into our eyeballs, these special retinal ganglion cells signal the SCN, and the SCN actually sends an inhibitory signal to the pineal gland so that when light is shining, you don't make melatonin. And then when light is not shining, then you release that inhibitory signal and the pineal gland goes ahead and makes melatonin. So when it's dark out, or when it starts to get dark, you start producing melatonin. So I wanted to take a moment because we know that reviewing things is a really great way to encourage long-term potentiation and improve and strengthen our memories. So we have 3 different visual tracks. So quick review here. So for our conscious perception of visual stimuli, our ability to actually see, we've got the retinal ganglion cells send their axons along the optic nerve, which crosses or doesn't cross at the optic chiasm, then the optic tracts, which take us to the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus, and then onto the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe. We just talked about the retinohypothalamic tract, which is our Zeitgruber for circadian rhythm, right? So that's our light response. And when it's light out, we don't make melatonin. And when it's dark out, we do make melatonin, which then helps induce sleep. But then the third one is the pretectal area pathway for visual reflexes. So I'm just going to show you that slide for a quick review. So the pretectal area is part of the midbrain. So let me use my little thing. So we've got some axons coming in, and let me do this on the other side. Okay, so here we go. We've got some axons that come along, and it looks like they're going to go with everybody else, but then look, they dive in here, and they go to the pretectal nucleus in the midbrain. And this is the part of our brain that does visual reflexes. So if you see something really quick out of the corner of your eye, you're going to turn toward it. It also helps with that smooth pursuit, how when we're watching something move, right, it helps coordinate the movement of our extraocular muscles to do so in a smooth fashion. So that was just a little quick review there. Oh yes, smooth pursuit. Okay, so when it comes to the retinohypothalamic tract, so coming back to that second of the three visual pathways, the one that's involved in melatonin production, the light that is best at suppressing melatonin production via this pathway is light that's in the kind of violet and blue part of the spectrum. So this kind of blue light is what really seems to be suppressing melatonin. And it happens to be that all of our devices, our laptops, our televisions, our tablets, our phones, the majority of light that they emit is actually in that part of the spectrum. When we're looking at them, we don't necessarily think so. It's if you're looking at this slide right now, they're like, well, it's mostly white. But you know how sometimes when you're driving at night, and if you're driving by somebody's house and they're watching television, you notice how the whole room is in a blue glow? Yeah, so most of the light that's actually coming out of our screens is in that blue part of the spectrum. And that's why if you're watching TV or on your laptop or a tablet or a phone close to your bedtime, it can actually suppress your melatonin production and make it harder for you to fall asleep. Some people are very sensitive to this, some people are not at all. So you can do a variety of things to adjust for it. We recommend you stop using these devices for an hour or more before you're going to go to sleep, and you do some other type of relaxing activity to help your body gear down and get ready for a good night of sleep. But if you do need to use these devices, or you really, really want to, you can change the settings so that you have more of the red and orange and yellow wavelengths coming out. So a lot of phones have like a night setting, or they have little special things. You can also buy filters that will change the appearance of your screen, or you can even put on a pair of orange sunglasses, and that will actually help too. So lots of options there. So since we're talking about melatonin, do the melatonin supplements actually work? Either for jet lag, to help you adjust to a new circadian rhythm, or just to treat general insomnia or general trouble sleeping? And the answer is yes, they do. And in fact, this has been shown in randomized controlled trials, placebo-controlled trials. We have good data that melatonin is helpful. Now, the effect size is overall small. So it's on the order of you fall asleep 5 to 10 minutes faster than you otherwise would. You get 8 to 15 more minutes of sleep per night than you otherwise would. But subjects in these studies feel like the improvement is meaningful. So even though the numbers may not be that impressive, people's experience of it is that it is helpful. Now, I do want to point out that the doses used in clinical trials were 1 to 3 milligrams. So be careful. A lot of what's sold in the store is 5 or 10 milligrams, which is probably way more than you need. So melatonin supplements can be helpful. And I received no kickbacks from Nature Made. I should probably reach out to them. No, it was just, I should have blocked that out. All right, anyway. What about alcohol? So there's this thing of like having a nightcap, right? So this is actually a painting by one of the Dutch masters over almost over 100 years ago, yeah. And so she's got her tray, she's got her candles, she's going to bed, and she's got a little tumbler of, I don't know, whiskey or something with her. So certainly having alcohol in the evening can help you fall asleep faster, right? It's a depressant, we know that. And we know that the early part of the night in people who've had alcohol before they go to sleep does have more deep sleep. Now, I have to wonder if it's just because they need to clean their brain out more because they have all this alcohol, which is technically a toxin. But anyway, but what happens then is the second half of the night is restless and they have poor sleep. So a lot of times people will use alcohol to treat insomnia, but then find that, a couple of hours into the night, or, somewhere 2 to 4 hours a night, they're waking up and then they can't fall back asleep. So it helped you to start with, but it didn't help you in the long run. The other thing that we see is it changes the sleep architecture of the normal sleep-wake cycles, and that people who've had alcohol in the evening have significantly less REM sleep. So they have significantly less REM sleep in that first half of the night, where you normally don't have all that much anyhow. But then they also, because the second half of the night is so disrupted and they're awake a lot, they also get deprived of REM sleep that they should be getting in that second half of the night. And as you know, REM sleep is important for memory consolidation, so you really don't want to miss out on it. So alcohol to help with insomnia is totally not recommended. What about Ambien? Generic name is Zolpidem, and some of the other sleep medicines. They also change your sleep architecture. You do not get the same patterns of brainwaves as in normal sleep. So the sleep that you get is not normal physiologic sleep. It's drugged sleep. Now, how closely does it mimic normal sleep, and are brainwaves really giving us an accurate reflection on how well your lymphatic system is working or all those other things? We really don't know. The image that we're seeing here is down here. They're showing you people who took Ambien, and the colors that we're seeing are how different their EEGs looked during the night compared to their baseline when they weren't on the medication. So significant changes in the architecture of your sleep and what's happening with your brain waves on the EEG. We're not really sure what that means. We do know that people can get dependent on these medications and can get withdrawal if they stop. We also know that they significantly impair your both motor and cognitive performance if you're awakened during the night. So if you're someone who is on call for something, like you work in healthcare, or you're an EMT or a paramedic or a firefighter, or if you're a parent and you might have to get up in the night and help with a small child, they can cause significant impairments during the night while they are in your system. So that's a potential risk for folks as well. So we generally don't recommend that people use these more than just very short term for most folks. We do know that the best interventions for insomnia or trouble sleeping are behavioral. So you're going to have some media assignments about that. But there are a few things that I just want to highlight really quickly. Keeping a regular schedule, the brain loves habits. It likes to be in a routine. And if your bedtime and wake up time is constantly changing, it is very, very hard on your brain. So as much as you can, I understand it's not always easy, but keep things as close as possible to a regular schedule with a regular, consistent bedtime and wake time. Certainly, alcohol and caffeine can disrupt sleep. You don't need me to tell you that. Exercise during the day is very helpful for sleep quality at night. So some type of physical movement and exertion, even if it's just going for a nice walk, can be really important in improving sleep quality. And then we talked, of course, about avoiding screens before bed. There are a whole bunch of other recommendations that you'll see in the media assignments. So in summary, we have this inherent biological daily rhythm that does respond to Zeitgrubers, to external cues, and is entrainable, and we can change it in response to moving to a different time zone, for example. One of the ways that sunlight or light of any sort, especially in the blue part of the spectrum, it impacts our circadian rhythm is through that retinohypothalamic tract. So the light will suppress melatonin production by the pineal gland via those special retinal ganglial cells that go to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus that then send signals to the pineal gland. Melatonin supplements can be helpful for folks if they're needed, but alcohol and sleep medications, other types of sleep medications anyway, can disrupt the normal sleep cycles. For most people, most of the time, they're not recommended, certainly not at least long-term use, maybe short-term only. So behavioral interventions are really where it's at for optimizing your sleep. So I hope you'll learn a lot about that from the media assignments. Thanks.